It's 6:15 and now feedback. Here's Chris Dunkley.
Hello again. The BBC has been receiving a lot of comment about the way it devoted 4 hours on Radio 1 and 4.5 hours on BBC 2 to the Nelson Mandela concert at Wembley Stadium on Bank Holiday Monday. Some calls were complimentary.
I'm pleased to hear the BBC is still the home of free broadcasting.
I want to thank the BBC for making me proud to be British again.
But calls of that sort were very heavily outnumbered by calls of this sort.
This occasion makes me ashamed to be British.
The BBC is obsessed with Nelson Mandela. The hysteria at this concert reminds me of the Nuremberg rallies.
I'm horrified that the BBC is sponsoring a programme which is promoting terrorism and anarchy.
What about the BBC giving more coverage to the harassment of whites in Zimbabwe?
Will the BBC now be staging a concert to celebrate the life of Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams?
We've also received a small number of letters, such as this from C.J. Loring of London North 16.
The BBC, our impartial BBC, has totally abandoned even the pretence of impartiality, racial or political, and now openly aligns itself with the jungle.
But numerous though the comments on that concert have been, they don't begin to compare with the volume of mail inspired by the changes at Radio 2. Once again there have been bouquets, such as this, for instance, from L. Fowkes of Cardiff.
I prefer the new Ken Bruce show on Radio 2.
That's the 2-hour slot from 10 till midnight, Monday to Thursday.
I found the old format of quiz shows, film music and so on rather stale.
Irene Gretorix of Staines declares,
The arts programme, Friday to Sunday evenings,
10:05 till midnight.
is a great improvement on what went before.
And Margaret and Celia Gardner of Woking say that, much as they used to enjoy Ken Bruce's morning programme,
Judith Chalmers is a worthy successor. With her friendly, direct manner, she is a natural.
but letters like that are very hard to find among the welter expressing pain, anger and outrage. Susan Munt of Colchester exclaims,
What a disaster! The new Radio 2 is really dreary. I've given it 10 days, but I'm unable to come to terms with the two main changes in the daytime, Judith Chalmers and the afternoon Yanks slot.
That's the 4 to 5 programme with presenters such as Howard Keel and Tenny Bennett.
Dear old Judith is part of my life. I'm 43, and I've no personal dislike for her, but with her programme I really feel I'm in a time warp.
Elizabeth Grant of London W7 announces,
I refuse to wait till 10 p.m. to listen to my favourite radio presenter. Ken Bruce is too good to be relegated to the wee small hours. What can we do to make the BBC, and in particular the mad axe woman, listen to reason?
That, I take it, is a reference to Radio 2's new controller, Frances Lyne, who's responsible for all these changes. Plenty of other correspondents have been having a go at her. Edward McLaughlin of Birmingham, for one.
Never in the evolution of light radio has the deadened hand of fustiness descended with such a lifeless and sickening thud as has smitten Radio 2 this week. New brooms are supposed to sweep up, freshen and bring some tone to the new day. So what's gone wrong? Does Nanny really think she knows best? Did she listen to anyone? Judith Chalmers and Frances Lyne between them have performed an invaluable service for me. Approaching my 7th decade, I've just discovered how many interesting sounds are competing for my attention outside the BBC wavelengths.
We've had more letters about the moving of Ken Bruce to the evening and his replacement in the morning by Judith Chalmers than any of the other changes, but the disappearance of Round Midnight with Brian Matthew runs it a pretty close second. Dennis Watkins of Raglan says,
In depriving us of Brian Matthew, you've deprived us of a personal voice, a thoughtful communicator at a time, midnight, when we need quiet, intelligent thought. He didn't rush his words, and we got to know him. That takes time, years often. Can they find us another friend? I wonder.
Dennis Watkins is clearly not alone. Here's Mrs. Muriel Bell of Pusey.
I feel like wringing that controller's neck. I hate her so much for what she's done. I started to listen to Brian Matthew when I was widowed 3 years ago. I can't tell you how much his personality and programme helped me. I've been fond of the theatre all my life, and now that I can so seldom go, I'm 79, it was absolutely marvellous to have Theatreland and all the wonderful people brought to my bedside. When I heard Brian Matthew's footsteps and the slam of the door after the final programme, I almost cried.
Alan Poole of Stanmore came up with yet another unkind characterisation for the new Radio 2 controller.
I can only assume that Frances Lyne was a butcher in a previous life. 1. Paul Jones's Rhythm and Blues show, chopped by 15 minutes. 2. Wally Whiten's Country and Western show, chopped by 30 minutes. 3. Sounds of the 60s, fewer records and more chat. Thank the Lord Andy Kershaw is on Radio 1, away from the Radio 2 controller's chopping block. Please pass on my comments to Ms. Lyne so that she can reflect on her new, improved programme format.
Well, I did, of course, and when I took your letters along to her, I pointed out that many of you clearly feel that her changes have deprived you of old friends. Brian Matthew, Ken Bruce, Adrian Love, and so on. Many listeners obviously feel that the routine of their lives has been changed.
Very few of those people have actually departed their lives altogether. They've been rearranged rather than actually sent off to another planet. Adrian Love can still be heard presenting Time Cycle. Brian Matthew is on Saturday mornings with Sounds of the 60s. And Ken Bruce is now going along rather successfully, I think, in a new slot at 10 o'clock at night. So really it's been a rearrangement. The overall reason for changing at all is to make the schedule more attractive and more relevant to Radio 2's target audience, the over 50s, and to try and raise the network's profile and to create some interest in it through new and different programming, because if we sound attractive, that way we attract new listeners, and really to refresh a schedule which, without change of any kind, will eventually weary even the most patient listener.
Is there a paradox there? I mean, both on the one hand, over 50s, and on the other hand, new listeners. I mean, are you saying that you want to attract a bigger audience of over 50s?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Are you happy with targeting an audience in that age range when it sounds like the opposite to what Radio 4 does, for example, which is always, I'm told, looking for younger listeners to bring in at the bottom end? If you target an over 50s age group, are you not in danger of having a diminishing population, a diminishing audience?
Radio 4 is different because it's the only speech channel, so it really has to be all things to all men, brackets, and women. We have 3 radio music services, and Radio 1 complements us to a certain extent. When I say I'm going for the over 50s, obviously it's not precisely at 50 you wake up and you like Radio 2. We've got lots of listeners in their 40s too. That's the kind of median age that one is aiming at. I'm very happy with it as a target audience because potentially it's huge. The over 50s make up over a third of the population, and they'll be the only sector growing in the year 2000.
Each time that I come and talk to a controller about changes of this sort, they tend to say to me, the reason for this is we want a bigger or an expanded or a slightly different audience. And it's always very difficult to know to what extent that is achieved. How long do we wait before we say, there you are, it's worked?
Well, the first thing we do is we wait for the research, and I'm afraid with impeccable timing, you've caught me just when the new schedule has come in, and I haven't a single figure which is given to me by Broadcasting Research Department, which I can say to you, there you are, we got that bit right because the majority think so, or we got that bit wrong and I'm going to be looking at it again. Obviously, we don't make changes without very careful thought, and this, in my belief, is going to improve the schedule overall and improve the service to the listeners. If I could perhaps say a little about the changes in the evenings, because we've made a number of changes there, and they're all designed to extend our coverage of specialist music. There are a number of musical genres at present unrepresented on Radio 2, and to help put this right, I've cut a little bit off all the programmes in the evening, which has caused some people some angst, but it's really to allow us to give more coverage to music not at present represented. Music such as barbershop, male voice choirs, dance music of all sorts, from ballroom to barn dance, bell ringing, Jewish klezmer music, Latin American gospel. I could go on.
And these are presumably
jazz.
things which in the past you've had letters saying, why don't you?
Indeed I have. And why don't I? Because there wasn't any room.
Let me take you back a little to the question of audiences and how you decide whether, in fact, what you're doing is a success. Because in the long term, radio audiences seem to be in decline. But controllers tend to argue that if they didn't make changes, the decline would be even faster. I mean, I've been told that many times. But we don't seem to have any proof of this, do we? The most common phrase in the letters to feedback is change for the sake of change. This is what people accuse you of. How do we know that the decline going on in radio isn't a result of the changes that the controllers make?
Well, we don't, but I believe that really it's competition that's causing smaller audiences. I think that the audience is pretty static and the cake is just being cut that little bit smaller in terms of slices as more and more stations come on stream. And we don't know that our changes are actually helping, but obviously controllers are competitive people and they're going to get in there and they're going to try and provide the most attractive schedule and the very best broadcasters that they can in order to try and maximise the audience. You don't just say, oh dear, audiences seem to be dwindling, let's sit back and accept it. You fight it.
Would you admit at all to the need of any new controller to make their presence felt?
Yes, I think there is a pressure to make some sort of change. Most controllers only serve for a period of about 5 years, and when a new one comes in, naturally they do want to make their mark. That is a fact of human nature. You do come in with a clearly agreed manifesto. I do discuss my plans with other people, and it was no secret what I intended to do if I got the job.
It's not as an arbitrary question of thinking, I'll change this and I'll change that, that'll prove I'm here.
Oh no, certainly not. Oh,
Despite
no.
what the letters all
You have to
tend
argue
to
and
say.
persuade your peers and superiors of the rightness of your thoughts.
One of the commonest things that's been said in the feedback letters is, or expressed, is surprise at Judith Chalmers going to the job she has. They say she sounds rather old-fashioned, seems to be appealing to an older age group, but then presumably that, from what you've said, is what you want, an older age group than Ken Bruce was appealing to. So is this a deliberate part of your plan?
I don't really want to get into a discussion of the styles of different broadcasters, but Judith, for example, is a very experienced professional, much liked on her previous appearances on Radio 2, and people say she's not like Ken Bruce. Well, of course she's not like Ken Bruce. There's only one Ken Bruce and one Judith Chalmers, and I'm trying to assemble a team of distinctive personalities.
I do sometimes wonder whether radio controllers realise how much they affect the routine of people's lives with the programme changes that they make. Charlotte Edwards has written to me from Wivenhoe saying that she's 16 and explaining, and I'm reading her letter now, for 6 years now I've looked forward nightly to going to bed and enjoying the excellent selection of quizzes and comedies on Radio 2 at 10 or 10:30. Imagine my horror when, on browsing through the Radio Times, I saw that this time slot was now taken over by Ken Bruce. Admittedly, the programmes have not gone off the air altogether. They're now on at 7 p.m. instead. Unfortunately, I don't go to bed at that time and have no wish to do so. With my GCSEs this summer, I want to be able to fall into bed after a hard day's revision and laugh at the news headlines or mind your own business. Ken Bruce is hardly the relaxing, funny kind of end that I want to a strenuous day. So please, Chris, storm whoever is responsible for this. Let Ken Bruce have the 7 p.m. slot. After all, the comedies and quizzes were here first. And the point that Charlotte Edwards seems to me to be making there, and it's one that comes up in other letters, is that you, or your predecessor, have accustomed her to this habit, and now, without so much as a by your leave, you're suddenly depriving her.
Yes. Well, I would say to Charlotte, consider me stormed, because Chris is looking at me very fiercely, but I do have to say that I am retargeting this channel for the over 50s, and of course they don't have homework to contend with. The reason that the programmes, the light entertainment programmes, have moved from 10 o'clock at night to 7 is really to make it easier for people to find them, and once again, it's that old phrase, to attract larger audiences. We've put light entertainment across the week at 7 with a different style each night, so that you will know in future when you're going to find your situation comedy or your quiz or your panel game or your film night. And I hope that by having a regular slot, we'll attract more listeners, because some very good programmes have been going out in a rather undisciplined way, and I think that probably they haven't attracted people because they didn't know they were there.
From everything that you've said, it sounds to me as though what was previously a channel concentrating to a large extent on an older audience is now really dedicated to it almost exclusively. Is that right?
Yes, I think that would be a fair thing to say. The over 50s.
Francis Lyne. We've spent rather a large part of this week's programme on those Radio 2 changes, so there's only time for a quick gallimaufry. I do love that word, it deserves more use. A quick gallimaufry of your other points. After listening to last week's edition of Any Questions, Marion Hahn of Broughton wrote,
3 cheers for James Naughty as chairman. He actually let the panellists answer the questions themselves. He didn't interrupt constantly or impose clever supplementary questions. Let's have him as permanent chairman.
Christina Ward of Sutton is among the hundreds who wrote to protest about the Radio 2 changes, but at the end of her letter she included another criticism.
It's the height of smarmy hypocrisy to put Mother Teresa on the front of the Radio Times, how spiritual we are at the BBC, and then put her 5-minute programme out after midnight.
2 listeners pounce upon bad habits among presenters. First, T.P. Oxley of Southampton on Radio 2's Derek Jameson.
He has a most disturbing and disgraceful habit of eating while talking. He's even on occasion declared that a croissant has stuck in his throat. I find this pig-like attitude of grunting and spitting his way through his croissants while attempting to articulate to the listeners most ill-mannered and offensive. Perhaps he could eat his breakfast before coming to work.
Then came a complaint from Epsom about a style of announcement used on Radio 4's PM.
They appear to think that the incomplete sentence, "That report by Chris Dunkley in Saigon," is satisfactory. What's the point in saving one word from a sentence and making it a non-sentence? A fraction of a second is saved at most. It's a gimmicky affectation. Could we return to "That report was by Chris Dunkley," etc.? This complaint by Colin Forrester.
PM certainly isn't the only programme where you hear that habit. And that's it for this week. Thank you for all your letters. Keep them coming.
Feedback was presented by Chris Dunkley of the Financial Times and produced by Nick Utekin. The address for your letters is Feedback, BBC, Broadcasting House, London W1A 1AA. In half an hour, we've the return of Cat's Whiskers. Andy Crane will be introducing a new serial, Finn McCool and the Small Men of Deeds. There'll be another Spamchester mystery for you to solve. You can hear the winning poems in the Rainforest competition. And Alan Hinks, the British mountaineer, will be talking about his forthcoming expedition to Nepal. Cat's Whiskers in half an hour at 7 o'clock.